Wow. Yeah, I just, I'm sort of humbled, you know, to speak or comment in any way after that, and just want to thank Serena so much for bringing to light, you know, this just tremendous woman in our history. And what I know of her, I know through the work that you've done. So I am personally grateful to you for bringing that, bringing her into my life. And I actually am sort of hopeful to know more, even and more fully about her. And I really want to thank Martha for putting together this unbelievable conference and for making connections, as you so often do, across people and ideas. So thank you. I guess I thought I would take up the invitation to speak from personal experience and to tell some stories and maybe kind of bring into the room some of the kinds of connections that Pauli Murray made throughout her life and the struggles, frankly, of the continuing to do the work, the foundations of which she and so many others laid. So, oh, okay. Is that better? Is that better? Can you hear that then? So as Martha said, I direct the Transgender Rights Project at GLAAD, and you know the fit between those roles is not lost on me as someone who identifies as both being transgender and lesbian. And it's kind of the challenge of my life to move throughout the identity, to move with the identities that I share, even in a community, an LGBT community, where those connections and those relationships remain fraught. So here I am, the director of a project in a organization whose history has predominantly been within the gay and lesbian work. And so I thought I'd tell a couple stories about that. And over a decade ago now, I represented a young transgender girl who, at the time that I met her, was 9 years old, and she had consistently identified as a girl. She was assigned sex of male at birth. She lived with her grandparents, who didn't understand this experience for the longest time. But eventually they did, and they grew to be supportive of her, and she went to school, and she was sent home repeatedly, day after day, because of her clothing and her appearance. In fact, to the point where she had to go and check in with the principal in the morning, who got to look at her and say whether or not she was dressed sufficiently masculine to remain in school. And eventually she just stopped going to school. And, you know, there was an idea, really, in the academic literature that we could pursue sex discrimination protections, and and there was starting to become, you know, some real possibilities for doing that. And so I saw this as, you know, an important case to really work on and try to develop the legal ideas. But, you know, as often happens, I, of course, was drawn into her experience and have the daily experience of moving through the world with a gender expression and a gender identity that makes other people uncomfortable. So, you know, it was really one of my first experiences doing this kind of work, having a deep personal connection to the client I was representing. And I was thinking of, you know, there's a part of Pauli Murray's life where she wanted to be a plaintiff in a case, and she actually wanted to be a plaintiff challenging the her exclusion from the University of North Carolina. But she wasn't resident in North Carolina, and so she wasn't a good plaintiff for the organization. She ended up being a plaintiff, as you talked about in the case where she was arrested for sitting in the wrong place on a bus. And then, of course, she becomes a lawyer. And, you know, this idea of your life becoming part of your advocacy and the difference between being a plaintiff and a lawyer, you know, it all sort of flows together in this way. And this is one of the things that happened to me in this case. So I thought I'd tell two stories. One is my client, you know, it was a big issue in the press, and she was really young, and it was really difficult for her to maintain any sense of, you know, just a normal daily existence. And so there was one day I was picking her up from school to go to a court hearing, actually, and the press knew me, so they were following me, and I'm sitting outside of school waiting for her. And all of a sudden, a group of young girls start walking out of the school, and I knew my client wasn't among them, but one of them, you know, comes forward, goes to open my door, and I'm thinking, what's going on? You know, why are you walking in this car? And the press followed her out, and they had set it up so that my client would duck out the back with a coat over her head, and I was to meet her down, you know, the block meet her a couple blocks away. So that was great, and the press reported complete misinformation about who this young woman was that I was representing and took her picture. And then we go to the court, and at the time there was a legal intern at GLAAD who was transgender, was just transitioning, just an early stage of transition. Young man, recent graduate from law school. And so he was sitting with me because he'd been helping me with the case. And our client was, you know, in the back of the courtroom just kind of watching. And the press reported that this young man who was sitting next to me was the client. Because there was just complete and utter, frankly, confusion at the time about what could a transgender girl be. And here was this young transgender man who was sitting next to me, who was the person who the press understood to be her. And then the last story I'll tell, and maybe I'll try to thread them together, or maybe I'll leave that for you to do, was that at the same time I was working on a family law case. And I went to court, and the judge came out, and all of a sudden the clerk said, all right, wait a second, we're going to have a meeting at, you know, bar. And the judge called me up and said, young man, why aren't you wearing a tie? And it was a really hard moment for me because, you know, what I wanted to do was not distract the attention from my client onto me, and I was suddenly put in this moment where I had to explain the difficulties I have pretty much every day thinking about what do I wear to court. And so I'm so moved by Pauli Murray's not just ability to live, but ability to change the world through her life. And it is so tremendously inspiring to me. And I think you're right that I guess the only way to understand the kind of invisibility of her contributions was that she was so far ahead of what anyone could possibly think about at the time, so that it was only in history, I guess, that we can have some understanding of her contributions to the work. So again, thank you for bringing her as the patron saint and bringing out the facts of her life, because what she has added and what I think she will continue to add remains even more to be fully developed. So thank you.